right, guys, I just want to introduce a special guest we have this evening. His name is Tom Fuentes. He does a podcast with Lou Colombo. Sorry, that name's a little tricky. So, anyway, Lou Colombo and Tom Fuentes do a podcast together, and he's going to come and talk about a couple of things that he's working on and doing. So, everybody, this is Tom Fuentes.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Last time I was out here and spoke, it was cold.
Yeah.
It was last January, actually, and we haven't spoken in front of you here since then. But anyway, a little, I guess, update about me since then. At that particular time, and I guess that video went out and went viral of me speaking, and mainly because I talked about my career in the FBI years ago. Sorry. And I talked about my career in the FBI, and basically during the short speech I gave, I ranted and raving about how bad things have become in the FBI, the Department of Justice. And every day in the news, you hear another story exemplifying what's gone wrong with the Department of Justice, and for people calling out to dismantle the FBI and take it apart, almost like we have defund the police, in the cities, and I don't think that's the correct answer. But anyway, my name is Tom Fuentes. I served nearly 30 years in the FBI, from street agent up to assistant director. My last 5 years, I ran the international program, which was almost 80 offices outside the United States around the world, in U.S. embassies and consulates throughout the world, and I ran that program. Now, interestingly, we already had the office in Moscow at the time. I opened the office in Beijing in 2002, and in 2004, Kabul and Baghdad. So, wonder how they're all doing these days. Anyway, I co-host a podcast. A friend of mine named Lou Colombo, who had been a New York City police officer, went out on disability when he injured a knee years ago, and owns a multinational, multi-million-dollar security operation. But we've been friends about 10 years, and he started a podcast about a year or so ago. I did a couple episodes with him. The production company decided that maybe they would start a new podcast. Lou and I co-host it. So it's out now. We just started putting episodes out about 2 months ago. The name of it is Operation Truth, and we tried to tell the truth and do, so we're hoping that we're able to keep telling the truth before YouTube and the other channels shut us down, because they're not going to like what we say, especially how negative we are about our current administration, our White House, our Department of Justice, and other agencies. So anyway, that podcast, we record on Monday afternoons, and then it's divided into 2 episodes, which go on YouTube, go out on the air Tuesday morning and Thursday morning. So tomorrow morning, our newest episode will be out about 6:30 in the morning Eastern time. So if you want to catch that, these last 2 episodes have been Lou introducing me, and then I do about the next 45 minutes or so. And again, a lot of it has to do with all of the negative things we're seeing in the news day after day. Now we're looking at the Trump indictments and that parade of just injustice that's being, going against him, his staff, anybody that ever knew him. If you were a newspaper delivery boy, you've probably been indicted if you took a newspaper to Mar-a-Lago, you name it. And we just see this as more examples that are horrible. Now, seeing the signs here for Jesus, one of the things that I'd like to talk about today that had only just come up last January is the FBI initiating an investigation on the Catholic Church in Richmond, Virginia initially, and that's been ongoing for more than a year. It became public in January, and in June and July, Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, testified. He testified before the House committee, and the various House members talked to him, including Jim Jordan. Then he testified in front of the Senate committee, and I've seen the clips of Josh Hawley interviewing him. Now, one of the interesting things is that at the time, Director Wray, now I'm not going to call him directly a liar, I'll just say that the truth wasn't necessarily forthcoming. How's that for bureaucracy talk? In any event, he said that when he testified in June, that when he learned about this thing, about the Catholic Church being targeted in Richmond, that he was, and he quoted, used the same word twice, aghast. I had all of those documents removed from our FBI system and initiated an inquiry to find out what happened, who started this, what are they doing, what's the story. He used the same exact words twice, June and in July when he testified. Now in the June, when Jim Jordan asked him, okay, Director, when do you expect to conclude your inquiry that you initiated in January to look into this? Oh, we should be done by the end of summer. Well, let me tell you something. When I was in the FBI, on my almost 30 years, 29 plus months, you know, I had been an inspector along the way. We inspected field offices for efficiency and effectiveness, executives, and on a regular rotation, and we did administrative inquiry. Now, I did that in between other assignments for almost 2 years, back in the early 2000s. Now, what would happen is, if an allegation of wrongdoing came up with particular, it could be the SAC, special agent in charge of a field division, might have gotten drunk and had a car crash, or allegations of other misconduct or financial malfeasance, whatever it might be, the inspection division would assign an inspector or more, one at least, and several assistant inspectors, which I started out, I was an assistant and later was an inspector, and we would get assigned to go to that place. And what they would do is, if you had an allegation like against the Richmond office, who put out this memo? How did this come about? An inspector from another division, having nothing to do with that division, and assistant inspectors, agents also that would work for the inspector, were sent to a place like Richmond, tasked with doing the inquiry and documenting it as quick as possible. So when Ray says that they initiated this inquiry, he initiated in January, and they might have it finished by the end of this summer, 8 months to do what would have taken us in my day before, and I hit mandatory retirement in 2008. So when I talk about the modern FBI, I'm talking about an organization that I almost can't recognize, pretty much can't. But in any event, in my day, an inspection of Richmond to find out what happened would have taken maybe 1 week, maybe 2 at the most. For him to say, we don't have the answer yet, and maybe we'll have it 8 months into the inquiry by August, I don't think he's being forthcoming on how seriously they take this inquiry. Secondly, in June, he testified that this was a one-off, one division, and possibly, you know, one or a few that put out this particular 11-page memo back in January, and only one division. This was Richmond. They went rogue. Now we find out when they removed some of the redactions from that memo, this investigation has been going on into the Catholic Church for more than a year, and also included the Los Angeles and Portland divisions that we know of. So to say that it was a one-off, one office, one agent that's gone rogue, or one supervisor or special agent in charge of the division that went bad, and then we find out Los Angeles right now is probably about the 3rd largest FBI division in the country. Portland is about comparable to Richmond, but LA is a huge division. So you have hundreds of agents, and now it looks like possibly nationwide, and possibly for more than a year, doing investigations, trying to get informants into Catholic churches in their area. And then we're seeing that the basis for this inquiry was that a leftist organization called the Southern Poverty Law Center put out a memo basically saying and informing the FBI, you know, these Catholic churches, they're doing the Mass in Latin. They must be domestic terrorists. That kind of ideology and extremism means that they could become violent domestic terrorists. They need to be looked into because of doing the mass in Latin. Is that unbelievable or what?
That is preposterous.
Now the other thing, you know, right now from a political standpoint, they wouldn't dare go after Muslim organizations just based on what they're preaching in the church. They would if there was, you know, like we had 20 years ago, that they were planning terrorist acts in some of the mosques, like in New York, but they wouldn't dare go after them because the whole world would light up and say, you can't do that, it's unconstitutional. First Amendment. You know, we know the First Amendment from freedom of speech, but freedom of religion is also a key tenet of, and freedom of assembly, of the First Amendment. So now, the one organization, religious organization, that you can't say enough bad things about if you're that left-winger is Christianity. A Christian church. Oh, we can't have that. We can have satanic churches, no problem. We can worship the devil all you want. But if you're a Catholic church and you do the Mass in Latin, oh, that's evil. It's evil. We have to investigate. We have to develop informants, send them into those churches, find out what's going on. And then you have a director of the FBI sitting there on the stand being grilled about this by members of Congress from House and Senate saying, oh, I was aghast. No, don't give us that. The second thing is, this one's going to be cruel to say. However, as a trained investigator and interrogator during my career, we learned to look for many indications of lack of truthfulness when somebody's being interviewed, when you're talking to someone. And a guy wrote a book, a doctor from Los Angeles wrote a book several years ago, and it became the basis of the TV show Lie to Me that was on about 10 years ago, which I love. My wife and I love that show. And what he talked about in the book, and what they do, you know, they exemplify it, let's say, in the TV show, is that if you're interviewing somebody, there are signs to look for, body language, and then he referred to it as facial micro-expressions that might indicate that you're not giving an honest answer to the question. Now, one of the indicators is you ask the question and the person kind of searching for what to say. And that's a good indicator that he's probably not going to be truthful. Because if you snap the answer back, why did you do that? Because I thought it was the right thing at the time. Okay, you're telling the truth. But if you start doing that, or your face, the muscles in your face, the micro expressions start twitching. Your lips start quivering. You become hesitant. You become, not forthright. If you watch Christopher Wray testify, he has all of that when he's talking. The micro expressions that would tell me he's less than forthcoming. I won't use the L word. He's not being forthcoming. You use whatever word you want. That's the word I use. And I'm watching, my wife Ning and I are watching him in these hearings and in these clips, and I'm telling her at the time, he is not being truthful, period. Because he would not answer those questions that way. And if he was being truthful, that back in January, when he saw what the Catholic Church, or heard what they were doing to the Catholic Church, he was aghast. How aghast was he when you don't have an answer to that 8 months later? He wasn't aghast. He was like, oh, another embarrassing thing. I'll get through this. And yet another thing to deflect on. Well, the investigation's pending. They ask him all these questions about, what about this former executive or current executive that was responsible for the Russiagate hoax against Trump, or responsible for a number of other false investigations that have gone on, or misuse of the Clinton-provided dossier to go after Trump and to go after members of Trump's team, to get FISA warrants, which were illegal to do that way. Well, that investigation is pending. I can't talk about it. He hasn't given a straight answer to anything he's been asked, and I don't know how long. He has no business remaining the director of the FBI if he can't. Now, several years ago, when he became the director, and some of these allegations back then were being made, he said, I'm going to fix it. Now, he was taking over from Director Comey, another less than forthright individual. But when he took over and all these allegations had been made against the Bureau, he was going to straighten it out. He wrote a memo and sent it to all the agents and employees worldwide. That'll fix it. He told them, don't be unfair. Don't be biased. Don't even give the appearance of bias when you're doing an investigation. That straightened it out. It was all fixed. 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Well, we see that it's not fixed, and it's going on day after day after day, and we see it all the time. And his answer to most of the questions is it's a pending investigation. Now, the latest thing, which surprised me, is Senator Grassley bringing up the FD form, which is an informant form from 2000, that said that Joe Biden received $5 million from the CEO of Burisma in the Ukraine. Hunter received $5 million from the same guy. And that the Burisma executive recorded the conversations, 15 with Hunter on the phone, 2 with Joe Biden on the phone, which he supposedly is in possession of those recordings. So anyway, the FBI gets this information from an informant who they regard as, the terminology we use is credible and reliable in the past. Well, this informant is so credible, he's not some walk-in off the street. He's actually been paid more than $100,000 for this reliable information in the past in other cases. So he provides this information to the FBI. A whistleblower tells Senator Grassley about it. Grassley contacts Director Wray. We want to see that form because it's not supposed to be classified. Well, it's an unclassified form, so therefore it's not jeopardizing national security to reveal that to us, the oversight committees in the Senate and the House. Wray says, his first answer, now this is not a lie, it's just a lack of being forthcoming. His first answer to that is, no such form. Doesn't exist. Well, later on, down the road, okay, it exists. And then here's the redacted copy of it, which doesn't tell you much what's in it, but enough. And so that form goes out. Well, then the House committee, the Oversight Committee, wants a copy of that same form, which at first Christopher Wray says doesn't exist. Well, now maybe, okay, we've got a redacted copy. Now they give a redacted copy to the House, and the committee members actually see it's redacted, so they don't see everything, but they see a lot about the $5 million to the president, $5 million to Hunter. Meantime, as they're looking at this, Grassley knows that the members of the House have now seen the memo. So he asks them, did you see the thing about the calls being recorded? They're like, what? What are you talking about? The form that the FBI showed the House members didn't match what Grassley saw. So Grassley's questioning House members, you mean that you didn't see the whole thing? No, what are you talking about? He said, well, in the form I saw, the informant says that the head of Burisma says he made phone calls and recorded them. And he has the recordings for insurance. So now, here's what's stupidity, I didn't say lie, stupidity on the part of Christopher Wray and the FBI. First, they deny there is such a form. Then they decide, oh, okay, they let Grassley have a copy, they let the House committee have a copy, and they don't match. They're not the same. So Grassley he starts asking them, what about the recordings? They don't know anything about it. They didn't see the same form. So then that starts an uproar. And the interesting thing was, the second part of that is so stupid, is that what should be the answer that Ray, or what is the answer he always gives when questioned on this kind of thing? What about that form? Ongoing investigation. So you've heard all of these, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Here, come tell us about it.
You're doing a great job.
When I get done, we want to hear your side. Yeah, so here you've got, stupidly, he doesn't say, can't talk about an ongoing investigation. He says, does the form, he lies, the form doesn't exist. And then they go through all this now, it does exist, they're looking into it, and then the house is lit up. Now, if I can digress for a minute, in the banking system, there's a form that banks send to the Department of Treasury, and it's called SARS, Suspicious Activity Report. Now, we all have heard over the years that if you do something, a transaction that's more than $10,000 in cash, you go to the car dealer, you buy a $20,000 car, you pay cash. Or you do something else and you do the transaction in cash, then that usually triggers a report. So what a lot of people doing money laundering do is they'll do cash transactions up to $9,999. Well, the law doesn't say it has to be $10,000. It says it could be less than $10,000, but if it's suspicious, by doing $9,999 on a daily basis, to avoid that, they could send the reports. The Bidens have had 175 SARS reports triggered. So what happens now is the House committee looking into the transactions and the money going to the Bidens, they start with those reports, issue subpoenas to the banks, give us the details of this transaction. Through those subpoenas, they find and get financial records showing the millions of dollars going to the Bidens, every member of the, I think 9 or 10 members of the family, all the way down to the grandchildren. And by the way, federal bribery statute says that if you have it set up that the money goes to a member of your family or your children or a cousin, that's still bribery. It's still illegal. Now you hear the Democrats foolishly saying, well, we don't have any evidence where the money was handed to Joe Biden, you know, in cash, and it was in this bag, and we could say, yeah, he accepted that. It doesn't have to be that. Money paid to a family member is the same as being paid to him because they're only getting it because of him. So that triggers bribery. And if you look at the Constitution, when they talk about impeachment, bribery is one of the statutes they name. So it can be treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors, or low crimes and no misdemeanors, like in the Trump impeachments already. So now you've got allegations of bribery. You've got allegations that were given to the FBI by a reliable, highly paid informant in 2020. So the next question for Christopher Wray is, okay, what kind of investigation did that trigger? And at the speed, the current FBI speed of operation, they should be doing that investigation in the next 15 or 20 years. So 2 or 3 years later, when he says there's been no investigation, why not? Why not? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Compromised and beholden to all these different entities and countries and oligarchs and you name it. So anyway, you know, to see this kind of thing happening, the investigations into the Catholic Church, and then not being honest about it. Or he could have said, the honest answer would have been, if I was still in the FBI and still an inspector, would have been, as soon as I heard about it, we assigned an inspection team to immediately go to, and we didn't pick Richmond agents or people from that division or who had worked in that division. We picked agents from other parts of the country to go to Richmond and initiate the inquiry. Now, one of the rules of an internal investigation is, if you think that what happened was criminal, current theft or embezzlement or something like that, then those agents are entitled to use the Fifth Amendment. So they get their rights read to them, and they can say, okay, I'm pleading the Fifth, I'm not going to answer you. Then what that would trigger is the FBI would immediately transfer them out and demote them from those positions. And the violation is you've embarrassed the Bureau, and this has gone public, and you are no longer going to be effective in your executive position. So it's a lack of effectiveness triggers your out, period. Now, if you don't have a criminal allegation, which this thing with the churches is not criminal, initially the allegation, then it's administrative. If it's administrative, when the inspectors come to talk to you, and I've done this many, many times, you hand the form to the individual. This is an administrative inquiry. You have no right to plead the Fifth. You have no right to refuse questioning. You must answer truthfully. If you don't, then you could be gone after and prosecuted. These are going to be sworn statements under oath that you're providing to the inspector. So in this situation, we have no indication of what's happened in Richmond, and now we learn Los Angeles and Portland. What's with that? This is absurd what's going on and how they slow walk these cases. Meantime, you've got David Weiss, the special, or at the time, U.S. attorney going after the Hunter Biden investigation in Delaware. So meantime, he slow walks the case on purpose. The IRS whistleblowers that just testified last month tell us exactly what happened. They were not permitted to follow logical leads. They were not permitted to do investigation at speed. And as a result, Weiss slow walks the investigation, and what happens? 5 years pass, and the more serious allegations against Hunter, millions of dollars in tax evasion, the statute of limitation runs out. So they can't be prosecuted. So that was the basis of the sweetheart plea agreement deal, which that deal, and this is the only time in my lifetime, going back to my whole FBI career, that we had a plea agreement where the judge threw out the agreement. Said, no, no, no. That agreement was giving Hunter Biden immunity for life, for the future. Any more future stuff they find, he can't be prosecuted. He was charged with not paying the income tax in time, which was a minor violation, basically misdemeanor violations, and then the gun charge, which was a felony, which about 90% of the people that are convicted on that charge go to jail. And in that case, he's given what's called pre-trial diversion, which basically means if you're a good boy the next 2 years, the charges are dropped, period. So all of Biden's talk about we got to get a hold of gun control and stop all these gun crimes and all of that, and here his own son is going to get away with a major felony concerning firearm violations.
Joe Biden wrote the crime bill.
Oh.
And Joe Biden wrote the 94 crime bill.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if he wrote it last month, he wouldn't remember it. So. Well, in a way, can you blame them? Because the more stupid stuff they do, the less we do about it. What are we doing about it?
What do we do about it, Tom?
Well, here's the answer. A lot of people don't want to hear this answer. There's my answer as a law and order guy. Our founding fathers set up a way to change the government, to change the people running the government. It's called elections. Elections matter. Now, when you look at the last several rounds of elections, electing these Democrats to be mayors and declare their city a sanctuary city, to be prosecutors and then not prosecute violent crime so the crime runs rampant in our street, or the president opening the borders like he's done, or Mayorkas opening the borders, or the Attorney General administering anything but justice. The answer to this should be 2024 election. Throw these guys out.
Yeah.
Now,
We did that in 2020, though.
maybe that'll happen. Now, my beloved hometown is Chicago. And Lori Lightfoot did her best to ruin the city. And then the state's attorney's office, the prosecutor there, again, with the lack of prosecution, doing her best. And Kim Foxx, the prosecutor, and many across the country were funded by George Soros. And the idea was that he's going to help prosecutors get elected, that then they don't prosecute. And then that brings down the cities because street criminals go wild and the police can't do anything about it. And so then they get disheartened. They don't have to tell the police what to do or not to do. They just make it so that nothing they do results in a conviction. Bowser in D.C., all over the country.
I have a question. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
So what you're saying, I think these are all Marxist Democrats that get together and conspire to do this around the country to bring subversion and instability to the country, right? So you're an ex-FBI agent. If that can be proven, why would that not be a RICO charge?
Well, it could, but who's investigating?
There you go. Yeah.
You know, the FBI, when they talk about defunding or dismantling the FBI, that's not the answer. The answer is jailing the top officials who aren't doing their job.
The 7th floor?
Because, my last 5 years, for 5 years I ran the FBI's organized crime program worldwide. Then later, my last 5 years, I ran the international offices. All of the offices the FBI has in embassies and consulates around the world. The relationships those agents had that worked for me with the host countries, with their justice officials, with their police officials, with their senior government officials, takes a long time to develop that trust. If you just wipe out the FBI, we're going to send new people out there, that might take them 25 years, if ever, to develop that kind of trust and relationships. So I don't see that as the answer. The answer is we have directors, the last two, or the current one and the one before him in particular, that have basically initiated these policies within the Bureau to be one-sided, to go after conservatives, or to go after MAGA, or get Trump, or any of that, and Democrats have immunity from everything. And getting back to the prosecutor and George Soros, for years, the World Economic Forum wanted to reduce the power of the United States worldwide, the economic power, the cultural power, even the military power. So they tried that, hoping that all of these developing countries would develop and be equal to the United States. Well, that didn't work. They've been doing it for 10, 20 years, didn't work at all. So now Soros and his people and the World Economic Forum and their people, the newest strategy in the last couple of years has been, we can't bring up the other countries, let's bring down the United States to at least that low or lower. That's been the policy. Now Soros is a genius because he figures, elections only happen every so often and all that. However, controlling crime on the streets is a critical factor, law and order. So by putting in all of these prosecutors that won't prosecute, he's allowed crime to just skyrocket in the major cities, particularly, I think 29 out of the top 30 are run by Democrats, and the prosecutors' offices run by Soros-elected Democrats. And so as a result, crimes aren't being prosecuted. Right here in this city, our beloved capital, they're not being prosecuted. So as a result of that, the quality of life goes down. People want to move out. The tax base gets diminished. Tourists, the tourism industry, big industry in Washington, people don't want to come here. It's not safe. They might get killed. And it's a legitimate worry. They might get killed. Yep. So as a result of that, Soros has been extremely effective, very successful in reducing the status of the United States worldwide, particularly in our own country with our own cities and our own mayors and governors and all of that. And so that's what's happening now. Now the next question is, our founding fathers wanted the solution to be peaceful change by the ballot box. You go to the ballot box, and that was supposed to happen in 2020. You have a country, Trump calls people bad names and he hurts their feelings and all of that. Okay. But he also had the United States in the strongest position it's been probably in our history. The economy, the military on the rise, you name it, everything was much better. You know, the old question is, are you as well off today as you were 4 years ago? And the worry is, even if you say, no, I'm not as well off, will your vote be fairly counted?
Probably not.
That's a big deal. And any effort by a Republican or any candidate to say that the last election was not fair, we can't have that. We got to prosecute, we got to indict them. That's treason. Now, one example, by the way, is that one of the phone calls Hunter Biden made to his Chinese funder.
Real quick, then we'll come right back to you.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you ready, Tammy? Thank you.
So much.
Yeah. Yeah, Tom.
Okay, there was a lot of talk back in the 90s, actually back in 2000 when Mueller took over as director, right after, actually about 3 days before 9/11. So September 2001, Robert Mueller becomes, and the answer at the time is very similar to today, that the 9/11 represented a breakdown in the FBI and the CIA being able to gather information, share it, and prevent the attack. So, you know, when they had the 9/11 Commission, many of you may not remember, the talk at the time was dismantle the FBI. The FBI has become too much of a bureaucracy. They can't walk and chew gum. They can't investigate bank robbers and criminal cases and at the same time counter-espionage cases and all that type of thing. Well, that was actually untrue. But in any event, big hue and cry in the country, the FBI should be abolished and a new agency just like the British MI5 should take over. Now, MI5, I worked closely with MI5 for years, because I ran the FBI's organized crime program for years. MI5 are a number of police officers from all over the country that get detailed to work at MI5 for 2 to 5 years, and then go back to their police agencies. While they're at MI5, they don't carry guns. They don't have arrest authority. They gather intelligence, and when they develop a case to where somebody should be arrested, they give it to Scotland Yard or one of the police agencies. So, very inefficient, and everybody, but they were the talk of the town. We've got to be like MI5. Well, then what happens? July 5, 2005, London experiences an attack, terrorist attack on their buses and on their underground, their subway system. 56 people are killed. So when that happens, MI5 needs to be abolished. They need to be more like the FBI. So that was the end of that. That stopped all of this stuff about the FBI needing to be abolished. Now Mueller, who becomes director the week before 9/11, he decides that, well, the FBI needs to be an intel agency. They need to be gathering intelligence. Well, I ran the organized crime program at that time, and all of our major OC cases were intelligence driven. We had hundreds of analysts gathering information. If something happened, if somebody got murdered, they could tell you, oh, that so-and-so did that. John Gotti did that. Sammy the Bull Gravano did. They knew the organization so well from the intelligence. They had worked it for years and years. They knew the answers to that. Now, our organized crime program in the 90s, La Cosa Nostra, the American Mafia, had 26 families. They controlled the 4 largest labor unions in the country. Teamsters, everybody kind of knew that. The laborers, the longshoremen, and the hotel workers' service unions. And in 10 years of investigation, using the RICO statute, the FBI took them out of those organizations. They no longer ran those organizations. They also, and organized crime requires corruption. So those unions were paying off politicians, judges, chiefs of police, you name it. We took them out of that using the RICO statute. So by the end of the 90s, they had gone from 26 families to about 5. We had taken them out of the leadership of the Teamsters, laborers, longshoremen, and the other ones, using the RICO statute, the civil and criminal provisions of the RICO statute. So those were all intelligence-driven investigations that dramatically reduced the power of the American mafia. At the same time, we prevented the Russian mafia and Asian groups like Triads and the Boryokudan Yakuza out of Japan and other groups, Nigerian, Albanian, obviously Russian. All these groups were prevented from getting the same power and foothold that La Cosa Nostra had. That was all during the 90s. Now, the benefit of that, I guess, to the country was when 9/11 happens, a number of organized crime experienced agents get moved over to go after terrorist groups because they're used to working international, multi-divisional, complex investigations, and they went to work on these other organizations. So that was a big change. But for Mueller and others to say we became an intel agency, nonsense. We had already been an intel, or we wouldn't have had that success for 10 years before he became director. So that was the advantage of what we were doing at that time. Those were complex cases, and the bosses went to prison, life without parole, by the numbers. And in fact, we had a joke in our New York office that so many gangsters were coming in to cooperate and try to make a deal that we were going to install butcher shop number tag machines so that they came in, they could pull a number and get called when it was their turn to go up. Okay, I want to make a deal. I'll give you my boss. I'll give you this. I'll give you that. So that's how effective. And I used to, speeches I gave at the time, that if you want to know the history of the FBI with organized crime, watch the Godfather movie. Absolutely accurate depiction of the control the mafia had in politics, government, policing, you name it, in the United States. And then at the time, I said, okay, watch The Godfather, then watch any episode of The Sopranos where you'll see Tony Soprano and they're fighting over vacant lots in Newark. That was the difference, that they no longer had anywhere near the power, especially political power, that they used to have. So for somebody to come along, whether it's Mueller or whether it was Jamie Gorelick, who had been the #2 person under Janet Reno in the DOJ, to have them come along and say, oh, the FBI can't do intelligence, nonsense. Another unknown fact for the rest of the country was, back in the early 70s, when Nixon was president, he was thinking about the trip to China. Well, the concern they had was that China and Russia, much like today, pretending to be so close. We're brothers in communism, we love each other. Well, Nixon wanted to know what would be Russia's reaction. The FBI, not the CIA, the FBI had the top informant in the Kremlin at the time. And, Tom Clancy writing about the Cardinal of the Kremlin, that's an FBI source. And the FBI source tells his handlers, we're actually in Chicago, where I served in the FBI first, they tell him that Brezhnev and Chairman Mao hate each other. There's none of this, we're brothers in communism, or none of that. And that in fact, if Nixon goes to China, it'll widen the gap between those two. That's what made him decide, okay, going to China. It's going to put a wedge between Russia and China. And it did. So now, we're hearing this talk today that Russia and China now are going to gang up on the United States. Well, maybe. But they don't trust each other today any more than they did then. So a lot of that kind of stuff is nonsense. But the point I'm making is the top informant in the Kremlin for the United States government was an FBI informant. So to say that the FBI can't do intelligence-driven investigations, can't gather intelligence around the world, it's a lie. It's nonsense. So we still hear that today. So the talk of dismantle the FBI, defund the FBI, well, the contacts that our people have, especially, I ran the overseas program my last 5 years. The contacts that our people have around the world They couldn't be replaced in the next 50 years if you picked a new agency to replace the FBI. You don't replace, you talk about the throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The baby is 14,000 FBI agents that are doing a great job. The bathwater with the dirt in it is on the 7th floor at FBI headquarters. That's what needs to get thrown out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So look, hey, Tom, tell everybody where to find you again, your podcast and all that. Tell them where to find your podcast.
Okay, the podcast that I was talking about, the latest episode will be on YouTube and TikTok and a couple of other platforms tomorrow morning. So the new episodes go out on Tuesday and Thursday morning. We record every Monday afternoon, and we record 2 episodes back to back. I do mine from my home, the Zoom studio that I built in my house, and then Lou Palumbo, my partner, goes into a TV studio in Jacksonville. So we co-host this podcast called Operation Truth with Lou Palumbo and Tom Fuentes. We have 2 episodes a week go out, Tuesday morning and Thursday morning, and then you can go back and look at every one. I think the episode tomorrow is episode 15 or 16, something like that. But you can go, you know, if you subscribe and go to the subscription list, you can look at every one of our episodes. And then Lou Palumbo had his own podcast called Between the Lines, and that was on for a year, once a week. And then the last 4 or 5 weeks of that in February and March, he had me on as a guest. The production company, and by the way, most people don't know, the major entertainment and information production companies are in Nashville, Tennessee, not Hollywood. Almost all of the podcasts in the United States produced out of Nashville. Almost all of the new TV shows, all of that kind of stuff are being produced. So they don't just do country music in Nashville. But in any event, the production company contacted us back in March after I had been on 4 or 5 times, and okay, I'm going to brag, our viewership went up a little bit. And I did some of this ranting and raving, and then Lou Palumbo does as much ranting and raving. If you like ranting and raving, pay attention to these episodes, because it's strong and it's no hold back, it's the truth. So in any event, the production company said, let's change Lou's original podcast, create a new one called Operation Truth, and have Lou and I co-host it. And so that's what we do now. We just started, I think, you can count back 2 a week. So we've done 15, 16 episodes now that have gone on the air. Yeah, a couple months. So basically, the newest episode, as I mentioned, will be tomorrow. Today's Wednesday, right? Yeah, I live in Fairfax, and so you want me to come back and tell you a bedtime story and watch everybody start going to sleep.
Do you have a social media, Twitter, or anything like that?
Yeah, I have a Twitter. Yeah, I forgot my Twitter name. I'm on Twitter, and I opened a TikTok. I still don't understand TikTok completely. I open it up, and then you see all these teenage girls jumping around, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I delete that and go to something useful? And then the next message I get is, you followed, or you looked at this person, you looked at, wait a minute, that popped up, I don't want to look at that. I'm about ready to close the damn thing.
It's funny how you mentioned, I'll tell you something real quick. So Twitter is a weapon, in my opinion. And you know, Twitter in China TikTok in China is completely different than it is here. So when you first open a TikTok account, let's say you're a 12-year-old boy, and you see a half-naked girl on there, and you're not going to click on it, right? Well, you just program TikTok to feed you that constantly.
Even if you don't click on it, you just it comes up just in the store. I don't know. But I didn't want to do it, and then the production company said we're on TikTok also. And I thought, great.
All right, we appreciate it. It was very interesting. And like you said, you'll come back sometime and share some more with us. Give a round of applause for Tom.
Thank you.